The engagement ball was in 11 hours. Outside, the first snow of November was falling on Ashvale Park, and somewhere inside that house, her house, a fire was burning in a hearth that had not been lit for her. Iris Vane had been standing at the servants' entrance for 4 minutes before anyone noticed her. That was, she supposed, the point. The housekeeper who answered the door was a small, brisk woman with the expression of someone who had learned long ago that warmth was inefficient. She looked Iris over the way one might assess a piece of furniture: dimensions, condition, usefulness. "You're the one from the agency," the woman said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am, Iris Ward." The false surname sat in her mouth like a coin. "For the evening." "Mrs. Pendleton," the housekeeper said, already turning. "Don't touch the silver. Don't speak to the guests unless spoken to. Don't look at the Duke." Iris followed her inside. She had not been through the servants' entrance since she was 7 years old, when she and the groundskeeper's son had climbed in through the kitchen window after getting mud on their shoes and were trying to avoid her father. She remembered the low ceilings, the smell of rendered fat and coal smoke, the particular kind of industry that the front of the house was never meant to see. Back then, it had felt like a secret, like adventure. It did not feel like adventure now. The house had changed, and it had not changed, and the combination was worse than either extreme would have been. The molding in the front hallway was the same. The staircase swept up in the same long curve. The painting of her grandmother, third from the left on the east wall, a woman with steady eyes and a slight smile that had always seemed to Iris like a private joke about patience, was still there. But the furniture was different, heavier, more deliberate, the kind of furniture that announced itself, and the man who owned it was somewhere in these rooms. She had known of Lord Edmund Blackmore, the Duke of Ashvale, before he had ever known of her. She had read his name in the solicitor's letter that arrived 8 months after her father's death, the one that explained, in the careful language of men who are paid to soften things, that the entail had passed, that the estate had been settled, that her father's second wife and her son held title to Ashvale Park and everything in it, that Iris, as an unmarried daughter with no legal claim, was welcome to remove herself and her belongings at her earliest convenience. She had removed herself. She had taken her mother's letters, a miniature portrait, and 3 books. She had left everything else. The Duke had purchased the estate 6 months later. From what Iris had been able to gather, he had not asked many questions about its history. Men with enough money rarely did. "The trays need to go up at 9, Mrs. Pendleton said, leading her past the kitchen and through a narrow corridor. "You'll work the floor with Greta. Stay to the perimeter. If a glass is empty, fill it. If a guest drops something, retrieve it. If someone speaks to you, answer briefly and move on. Yes, ma'am." "You've done this before?" "Yes, ma'am." She had not done this before, but she had watched it done from the other side of every room in this house for the first 23 years of her life. She knew where the drafts came in. She knew which floorboard near the library door creaked on the left side and not the right. She knew that the long mirror in the ballroom caught the candlelight at an angle that made everyone's face look slightly more interesting than it actually was. What she did not know was what she was going to do when she found what she had come looking for. Her father's study had been locked since the estate changed hands. Not the study itself. She had no particular attachment to the room, but what was in it. A deed of personal property. A letter. 2 documents that, according to the solicitor she had finally found willing to speak plainly to her, would prove that a portion of her mother's estate had been set aside in trust before the marriage, independent of the entail, and that her stepbrother Godfrey had filed paperwork claiming it as part of the general inheritance without disclosing its origin. Fraud was the plain word. No one in the solicitor's office had used it. But it was what it was. The documents, if they still existed and had not been destroyed or moved, were in the locked drawer of the desk in that study. She needed 40 minutes alone in that room. The ball would give her the distraction. The position in the household would give her the access. What it required her to be, for one evening, was invisible. She had not understood until tonight how much of her life she had spent doing the opposite. The ballroom at 9 o'clock was everything she remembered and nothing she could afford to feel about. She moved through it with a tray of champagne flutes, tracking the room the way she had been trained from childhood to do. Not for survival, then, but for social management, which was, she was beginning to understand, not so different. Godfrey was there. She had expected that. He was standing near the far window with a glass of something darker than champagne, and the particular posture of a man who is trying to look as though the room belongs to him, which meant he was not yet certain that it did. He had grown a beard since she last saw him. It did not suit him. Nothing much suited Godfrey. His mother, her stepmother Cecilia Marsh, was positioned near the entrance in a gown of deep amber, working the room with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent 30 years treating social gatherings as operations. She was beautiful, and she knew it, and she had never once, in 12 years of living in this house, allowed Iris to forget the distinction between a daughter of the blood and a daughter of convenience. Iris kept to the perimeter. She did not look at either of them directly. She was learning in real time the particular skill of looking, without looking, the way one's gaze slides past a thing while the mind retains it perfectly. She catalogued the room, exits, occupied positions, the location of Mrs. Pendleton, the position of the study door across the hall, and then, without planning for it, she saw the Duke. She had formed a picture of him in the months since his name had first appeared in connection with this house. The picture had been, she admitted to herself now, ungenerous. A man who bought estates without asking questions about their history was, in her imagination, a certain type, incurious, comfortable, accustomed to moving through the world without meeting resistance. The man standing near the hearth was none of those things. Or rather, he might have been all of them. She had no way of knowing, from this distance, but he was not incurious, he was watching the room. Not performing watchfulness, the way some men did at gatherings like this, to appear intelligent, actually watching. His attention moved from face to face with the deliberateness of someone taking inventory, and when it paused long enough to mean something. He was tall, dark-haired, perhaps 30. His expression was not unkind. It was reserved in the way that certain places are reserved. Not empty, but not yet open. Iris moved past him with the tray. She had been in the room for 40 minutes when Godfrey's elbow caught her. She was not entirely sure it was an accident. She had been watching him, peripherally, since she entered, and she had seen the moment his gaze snagged on her. A half-second of recognition, or something close to it, before his eyes slid away. She had told herself she was imagining it. She had always known Godfrey to be many things, but attentive was not usually one of them. The champagne went across the front of her dress, 3 glasses. The tray tipped, caught, and she managed to keep it level by a small miracle of reflex, but the damage was done. Cold champagne soaked through to her skin. The fabric of the borrowed uniform, too large, pinned at the waist, went transparent across the shoulder. "Oh," Godfrey said. His voice carried. Terribly sorry. He did not look sorry. He looked like a man who had just done something small and satisfying. The conversations nearest to them didn't stop. They just changed pitch. The way sound changes when a room becomes aware of itself. Iris set the tray on the nearest surface. She looked down at the ruined dress. She was calculating very quickly time, attention, the location of the service stairs, how long it would take Greta to notice she was gone from the floor. "You should go change." This was a woman to her left, whose name Iris didn't know, a guest Pearl's a look of practiced sympathy. "The housekeeper will have something." "Yes," Iris said. "Thank you." She picked up the tray. She walked toward the service door. She did not hurry, because hurrying would have meant something, and she was not going to give Godfrey the satisfaction of meaning. In the corridor, she set the tray down on a side table and stood for a moment in the cold quiet. Her dress was ruined. Mrs. Pendleton had a spare uniform, almost certainly, somewhere in the household linens. She could retrieve it, go back out, and finish the evening as planned. Or she could go to the study now, while Godfrey was in the ballroom, while Cecilia was occupied with the room, while the household's attention was entirely directed elsewhere. She went to the study. The lock was the same one that had been on the door since she was a child. Her father had lost the key twice. Both times, the estate carpenter had shimmed it open with a piece of cardstock and a penknife, and her father had watched him do it with the tolerant air of a man who found the mechanics of things more interesting than their function. Iris had watched too. She had been 11 the second time. She remembered exactly what the carpenter had done. It took her 3 minutes. The cardstock came from the back of a household inventory list she found on the hall table. The penknife came from the inside pocket of her dress, where she had put it before leaving her rented room that morning, just in case. Just in case had arrived. The study was dark. She did not light a lamp. She knew the room well enough to cross it without light, which she did, reaching the desk by memory and touch. The drawer was locked separately. That lock was newer, not the original, and she stood for a moment with her hand on it, recalibrating. This was going to take longer than 3 minutes. "The candle is on the left side of the mantel." The voice came from behind her. She did not spin. She turned, which was different, slower, controlled. The movement of someone who has decided to face a thing rather than react to it. Her heart was doing something immoderate in her chest, but her face, she was fairly sure, was not. The Duke of Ashvale was standing in the doorway. He had a glass in one hand. He was not, as far as she could tell, alarmed. He was watching her with an expression she could not immediately name. Not anger, not suspicion exactly, but the focused attention of someone who has encountered a puzzle and is not yet certain whether it is interesting or merely inconvenient. "Your Grace," she said. "The candle," he said again. "Left side of the mantel. Unless you prefer to work in the dark, which I notice you were doing quite effectively." She did not move toward the candle. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "You owe me the truth," he said, which may or may not be the same thing as an explanation. They often aren't. He stepped into the room. He set his glass down on the side table near the door, not on the desk, she noted, not claiming territory, just setting something down. "You know this room." "Yes." "You came in from the east side without looking for furniture." "Yes." "And you know how to open the hall lock without a key." He glanced at the door. "I had someone put a better lock on the study when I moved in. The previous owners apparently had some concern about access to certain papers." Something shifted in her chest. "Did they?" The solicitor who handled the estate sale mentioned it. He was not, on reflection, a man I would trust to handle an estate sale. He paused. "I've had my own solicitor reviewing the documentation for the past 3 months. He's found several irregularities." She looked at him. She was trying to determine what she was seeing, and she could not quite manage it. "Why?" "Because when I bought this house," he said, "I asked a great many questions and received answers that did not fully align, which is, in my experience, how fraud usually presents, not with gaps, but with excess. Too much explanation for things that should be simple." He looked at the locked drawer. "Were you looking for something specific?" The question was direct. The room was cold. Outside, she could hear the faint echo of the ball. Music, movement, the ambient sound of people performing the version of themselves they had decided to bring. "A deed," she said, "and a letter." placed in trust before my mother's marriage, independent of the entail. My stepbrother claimed them as part of the general estate. He had no right to. There was a silence, not an uncomfortable one. The kind that happens when a room is absorbing something true. Iris Vane, he said. She had not told him her name. She had given the name Iris Ward to Mrs. Pendleton, and she had not spoken to anyone else tonight, except in the one-word answers of a woman moving through a room invisibly. "You've done your own research," she said. "The portrait in the upstairs hallway," he said. "Third door on the left. The woman in it has your eyes and your particular way of standing, as though the room is moderately failing to meet your expectations." He almost smiled. It was not quite a smile. It was the approach of one. "I noticed it the first week I was here. I wondered who she was. I asked the housekeeper, who did not know. I asked the solicitor, who changed the subject. Iris thought of her mother's portrait. She had not gone upstairs. She had not trusted herself to." "The drawer," she said. "Do you have a key?" He reached into his coat pocket. He set a small key on the desk between them. "I had the locks changed when I moved in," he said. "The solicitor gave me the original contents of the desk. I kept them as they were. I didn't know what I was keeping." He paused. "I think I may have been waiting to find out." She picked up the key. Her hands were steady. She was mildly surprised by this, given the circumstances. The ruined dress, the cold room, the 7 months of careful planning that had led to a moment she had imagined approximately 300 times. And none of those imaginings had included this man standing 4 feet away from her, while she unlocked the drawer that contained the only proof she had that she had been robbed. The drawer opened. Inside was a sheaf of papers, neatly kept, the order undisturbed. Her mother's handwriting on the cover page. She recognized it the way you recognize a voice. Before you're ready, before you've prepared for it, just immediately, already. She did not cry. She had not cried in 7 months, and she was not going to start now in this room in a borrowed dress that smelled of champagne, with a duke she had met 30 seconds ago. "The engagement tonight," she said when she had herself arranged, "between your cousin and Godfrey Marsh." "My cousin Beatrice," he said, and something in his voice had changed, slightly, carefully. "Who told me, when I asked her yesterday if she was certain, that she was perfectly content, and then spent the next 10 minutes telling me about a trip she would like to take to Edinburgh." He paused. "I have some concerns about the engagement." "She's not the first," Iris said. "He was engaged twice before." Both women withdrew. Both received settlements that were, according to the same solicitor whose work you've been reviewing, drawn from accounts that should not have been accessible. The Duke was quiet for a moment. Outside, the music had shifted, a slower piece, the kind that signals the room is reorganizing itself. "That's 3, he said. "Yes, and the irregularities in my documentation represent approximately 4 years of activity." He said it flatly, the way someone speaks when they are delivering information to themselves as much as to anyone else, "beginning shortly before your father died." Iris looked at the papers in her hands. They were real. She had held the idea of them for so long that the reality of them, the weight, the texture of old paper, the slight fading at the edge, felt nearly implausible. "I need to speak to Beatrice," she said. "So do I." He picked up his glass from the side table. "If you'll give me 10 minutes with the papers before you leave with them, I'd like my solicitor to have made note of what they contain. I think we can arrange to have both conversations tonight." She looked at him. She had come here to take something back. She had not come here to be helped, or to be understood, or to have someone hand her a key and stand in a cold room at midnight and speak plainly to her about a situation he had no obligation to care about. "You'll want the papers filed properly," she said. "Before anything else is moved or destroyed, my solicitor is at the ball." He glanced toward the door. "He rarely misses them. He says they're professionally useful." He almost smiled again, and this time it arrived. briefly with a certain quietness. "I'll find him, Your Grace." He turned at the door. "Why?" she said. Not the whole question, but enough of it. He considered it. "Because I asked questions about this house before I bought it, and the answers were wrong, and I bought it anyway because the answers seemed sufficient." He looked at her steadily. "That's not something I'm comfortable leaving as it is." He left. The door stayed slightly open, the way it had always stayed slightly open on cold evenings, because the latch had never caught cleanly on a north wind. Iris stood alone in the study that had been her father's, holding the papers that had been her mother's, in a dress that was not hers, and a name that was not hers, and a version of this night she had imagined 100 different ways, and never once like this. Through the wall, the music played on. She thought about Beatrice, who wanted to go to Edinburgh. She thought about Godfrey, who was almost certainly on his third drink by now, and beginning to believe the evening had gone as he intended. She thought about her mother's handwriting on the cover page, and the way it had arrived in her before she was ready. She set the papers on the desk, carefully, in order. She smoothed the top page with her palm. Then she went back out into the hall, and she walked, not hurrying, not performing, toward the ballroom, because the evening was not finished, and she had never in her life left a thing half done. The floor was cold under her feet. The champagne stain had dried to a pale shape across her shoulder, faintly iridescent in the candlelight. She thought, as she reached the ballroom door, that Godfrey was going to see her come back, that he would have expected her to leave, that the particular quality of his surprise, when she walked back into that room with her ruined dress, and her level gaze and everything she now held, would be worth considerably more than anything he had spent the evening trying to take from her. She was right. She opened the door. The whispers, when they came, were nothing. She had survived worse things than a room deciding how to look at her. She had survived the letter from the solicitor and the removal of her belongings, and 7 months in a rented room with a penknife in her pocket, waiting for the moment when she could walk back into her own life and ask for it to account for itself. The Duke of Ashvale was standing near the window on the far side of the room. He had found his solicitor, a neat, silver-haired man she did not know, and was speaking to him quietly with the kind of focus that left no room for performance. He looked up when she entered. She did not look away. Across the room, Godfrey set down his glass, and somewhere in the long quiet of the house that had been hers, and was not and might yet be something she had not yet finished deciding, the fire in the hearth burned steadily on, as fires do, indifferent to everything except the fact of itself.